My daughter put me in a memory care facility to take my house, and I let her think it worked. When she showed up 3 weeks later to clear out my belongings, she found me sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee and a real estate attorney. I want to tell you how that morning felt. Not the dramatic part, I'll get there, but the moment right before I opened the door. I stood in my own kitchen, 64 years old, listening to her key scrape uselessly against the new deadbolt, and I thought about the 31 years I'd spent paying off that house. The leaky roof I fixed myself in 2003. The kitchen I renovated after my wife passed. Every corner of that place had my fingerprints on it, my sweat in it, and my daughter had spent 4 months trying to take it from me while I was locked inside a facility I hadn't agreed to enter. Before I get to the ending, let me go back to where it started. Because it didn't start at the facility, it started on a Sunday in February with pot roast. My daughter called to say she wanted to bring dinner. Just the two of us, she said. Catch up. I hadn't seen her much since the holidays, which wasn't unusual. She lived 40 minutes south in Naperville, worked long hours, had her own life. I didn't press. I was never the kind of father who guilted his children. Her mother used to say that was my flaw, that I gave too much space and called it respect. She arrived with a Dutch oven and a folder tucked under her arm. We ate. We talked about her job at the insurance firm, about my neighbor Wendell's hip surgery, about whether I was keeping up with the gutters. Normal conversation, the kind that makes you lower your guard completely. After dinner, she opened the folder. Dad, I've been thinking. You're 64. What happens if something goes wrong? A fall, a health scare. You're here alone. There's nobody. She laid 2 documents on the table. One was a healthcare power of attorney. Standard stuff, she said. The other she described as an estate planning update. Just modernizes the old will, she said. Make sure everything transfers smoothly if something happens. Her husband, my son-in-law, a man I'd never fully trusted since the week he asked me how much the house was worth, 3 months after they got married, sat in the car outside. I found that out later. He didn't come in. She said he was on a work call. That detail bothered me more than anything else later. He was out there the whole time. I signed both documents. I trusted her. She was my daughter. I watched her grow up, helped her move 4 times, co-signed her first car loan. You don't armor yourself against your own child. She left by 8. I washed the dishes, watched the news, went to bed. I remember thinking it was a good evening. 6 weeks later, she called to say she was worried about me. I'd been forgetting things, she said. Leaving the stove on. She'd noticed I seemed confused during our last phone call. Had I talked to my doctor? I told her I felt fine. I told her I'd had a busy week. She said she'd already called my primary care doctor and mentioned her concerns. Just as a precaution, she said, I should have heard the machinery in that sentence. I didn't. Within 2 weeks, my doctor, a man I'd seen for 11 years, sat across from me in his office with a concerned expression and a referral. He said my daughter had noted some behavioral changes. He said it might be worth a cognitive evaluation, just to have a baseline, he said. The evaluation happened at a clinic in Schaumburg. I answered questions, remembered words, drew clocks, counted backward. The evaluator was professional, neutral, gave me nothing. My daughter drove me. She held my hand in the waiting room. 3 days later, she called with what she said was difficult news. The evaluation showed early indicators, she said. Nothing severe, but enough that her husband had found a place. A memory care community in Elgin. Wonderful staff, she said. Beautiful grounds. Just for a short stay while we figure out next steps. I told her I didn't want to go. I told her I felt completely fine. I told her I would get a second opinion. She cried. She said she was terrified of something happening to me. She said she couldn't sleep at night, imagining me falling down the stairs alone. She said she'd already put down the deposit because the wait list was long, and she didn't want me to lose the spot. I went. I don't fully understand why, even now. Grief does something to a man's defenses. My wife had been gone 3 years, and I still hadn't fully rebuilt whatever wall her death took down. My daughter was the last close family I had. When she wept and said she was doing this out of love, some part of me believed her and some other part didn't want to find out she was lying. The facility was clean. The staff was kind. I was assigned a room with a window overlooking a courtyard, and they took my car keys on the first day for safety reasons. My phone worked. My daughter called every few days. She said the house was fine, she was checking on it. She said she'd water my tomato plants. Small domestic reassurances that now feels like someone describing how well they're caring for something they've already stolen. I was there 11 days before I understood what she'd actually done. A man named Hector ran the facility's common room activities, puzzles, cards, that kind of thing. He didn't talk to residents like they were fragile. One afternoon he mentioned, casually, that a resident's family member had recently tried to redirect benefit payments and the facility had flagged it. He wasn't talking about me. He was talking about someone else's situation. But he described the mechanics, power of attorney being used to redirect assets, accelerated property transfers, and something cold moved through my chest. That night I lay in my room and thought about the second document she'd laid on my table alongside the healthcare directive. I called my bank the next morning using my cell phone. I gave them my account information and asked about recent changes to the account. The representative, a young woman who sounded bored until she wasn't, told me that a beneficiary change request had been submitted 2 weeks prior, an authorized agent. The name on the power of attorney matched my daughter's husband. I asked her to put a hold on any further changes. She said she'd flag the account and escalate to the fraud department. Then I called my neighbor Wendell, who was still on crutches from his hip, but had a car his wife drove. Wendell had known me 22 years. He knew something was wrong the moment I told him I was in a memory care facility in Elgin. He said, and I'm quoting him exactly, "That is the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard in my life. I'll have Norma there in an hour." I didn't sign myself out. I walked out. My belongings fit in one bag. I left a note at the front desk with my phone number in case anyone needed to reach me for legitimate medical reasons. Wendell and Norma drove me home. The house looked the same from the outside. Same pale yellow siding, same oak tree I'd planted when my son was born and replanted when we moved here. Same crack in the front walk I kept meaning to fix. Inside was different. My wife's jewelry box, which sat on the dresser in our bedroom and which I had not opened since she died because I couldn't yet, was open and half empty. Her mother's pearl earrings were gone, the diamond anniversary band, a gold chain her father brought from Poland. My father's pocket watch, which had sat in a velvet case on my study shelf for 15 years, was gone. The lockbox in my closet where I kept my original property deed, my wife's death certificate, and about $1,200 in emergency cash, open, emptied. I stood in my study for a long time. I didn't cry. I'd used up crying somewhere in year 2 of widowhood. What I felt instead was something clarifying. A cold, precise decision-making calm I recognized from 30 years working in commercial insurance, from every bad faith claim I'd ever had to untangle. I knew how to document. I knew how to build a case. I knew what premeditation looked like when it was wearing a family's face. I called a locksmith first, new deadbolts on every exterior door, pick-resistant, keypad backup on the garage. The locksmith, a quiet man who clearly sensed something had happened, said nothing and worked efficiently. He had it done in 90 minutes. I paid him in cash from Wendell's emergency 20 that I'd pay back Thursday. Then I photographed everything. Every empty surface, every open box, every gap on the shelf where my father's watch used to sit. I photographed the jewelry box, the lockbox, the closet. I made a written inventory with estimated values. The pearl earrings alone had been appraised at $3,400. Wendell came back with a casserole and his phone, which he handed me without comment. I used it to find an elder law attorney. Her name was Beverly Okafor, and she had an office in Oak Park that smelled like strong coffee and old carpet. She was somewhere in her early 60s, unhurried, and she listened to the complete story without interrupting. When I finished, she put down her pen. The second document you signed, she said. If it was a deed transfer, we can challenge it on the basis of fraud and misrepresentation. She asked me what my daughter had told me the document was. An estate planning update. She said it modernized the old will. Did you receive a signed copy afterward? Never. She said she'd file it with her records. Okafor made notes. The power of attorney for healthcare is probably legitimate, she said. But if there's a separate financial POA, which it sounds like there is, and your son-in-law used it to attempt account changes within weeks of you going into that facility, we have a serious fraud case. She looked at me directly. This was planned before that Sunday dinner. Yes, I said. I know. She took the case. Retainer of $4,000, which Wendell lent me from savings he swore he didn't need, and I swore I'd repay with interest. Okafor filed immediately, motion to invalidate any property or financial transfers executed under an improperly obtained power of attorney, emergency petition to document the fraudulent cognitive evaluation referral. She also called the Illinois Department on Aging's Elder Abuse Hotline. That call, she told me, would generate its own investigation separate from the civil case. I filed a police report the same afternoon. Property theft, items stolen from my home. The officer taking my report, younger than my youngest pair of shoes, looked up when I listed the items and their values and said, quietly, "Is this a family matter?" I said, "It's a theft matter." He nodded and typed faster. 2 days later, my daughter called. She'd been notified by the facility that I'd left. "Dad, where are you? Are you safe?" "I'm so worried." "I'm home," I said. "Inside the house." "Your key doesn't work anymore." Silence. "Then what do you mean your key? I had the locks changed." "Dad, you need to come back." The doctors said. "There are no doctors," I said. "There was one cognitive evaluation that your husband arranged, and I have since been evaluated by a neurologist of my own choosing who found no indicators of impairment whatsoever." I spoke clearly and slowly. "I have retained an attorney. I have filed a police report regarding items stolen from this home. I have placed a fraud alert on my financial accounts. This conversation is being recorded with your knowledge as I'm telling you now." Her tone changed. It went from frightened daughter to something flatter, harder. "You're making a mistake," she said. "That document is legal. The transfer is recorded with the county." "I'm aware," I said. "My attorney is also aware." She hung up. That evening, Wendell came over and we sat on the back porch. He didn't say much. He'd known my wife. He'd helped me carry her hospital bed down the stairs when we brought her home for hospice. He understood that some sorrows have no words useful enough to spend on them. We drank decaf because his doctor had him off caffeine and I didn't want to drink real coffee in front of him. What I'd found today, when Okafor's paralegal pulled the county recorder's office files, was a quitclaim deed. Not a deed of gift, not an estate planning update. A quitclaim deed transferring the property to my daughter and son-in-law jointly, dated the Sunday of the pot roast dinner. My signature, genuine, notarized by a woman whose name I didn't recognize. Okafor tracked the notary. Her name was Gail Withers, and she operated out of a UPS store in Bolingbrook. When Okafor's investigator spoke with her, she confirmed that she'd been contacted by my son-in-law, paid $250 cash, standard fee was $25, and met them at the UPS store on a weekday afternoon. She said I was present, seemed fine, signed willingly. She said my son-in-law told her I had difficulty getting around and couldn't come to a proper office. She said she hadn't thought much of it. She'd notarize her statement. She was uncomfortable with what she'd learned and said so. Meanwhile, my son-in-law had retained an attorney of his own, a man named Fogarty, who filed a response asserting the quitclaim's validity and requesting the court compel me to vacate the property I'd owned for 23 years. The motion used the phrase rightful owners. Reading it in Okafor's office, I kept my face neutral. Inside, something burned steady and cold. Fogarty's strategy, Okafor explained, was to frame the cognitive evaluation as protective, loving, appropriate, to position my departure from the facility as evidence of instability. to separate the property transfer from the elder abuse allegations and treat it as a clean legal document between willing parties. It was the same playbook used in every predatory transfer case she'd seen. Smart, she said. If the facts weren't so bad for them, the facts were bad for them. My neurologist, Dr. Anand Mehta at Northwestern, produced a written evaluation dated 4 days after I left the facility. Intact cognition, normal executive function, no indicators of dementia or cognitive decline. His notes also observed mildly that the original referral had come not from a treating physician but from a family member expressing concerns, and that the evaluating clinic's report was based on a single session with no follow-up baseline. The Illinois Department on Aging investigator, a woman named Constance Webb, who had the energy of someone who'd seen everything and was still angry about all of it, interviewed me for 2 hours, reviewed the timeline, reviewed the financial account change request, reviewed the facility admission paperwork. She told me nothing directly, that's not how investigators work, but she sent a copy of her preliminary findings to Okafor, and Okafor called me immediately afterward. They're going to recommend a finding of financial elder abuse, she said. That's separate from the civil case, but it goes on record and the judge will see it. My daughter's attorney sent a settlement offer 6 weeks into the litigation. She would sign a quitclaim back to me. I would pay them $75,000. They would walk away. No admission of wrongdoing. $75,000. For my own house. For the house where my wife took her last breath in the front bedroom. For the house where I still hadn't gotten around to painting over the pencil marks on the kitchen door frame where we'd measured our kids every birthday until they got too tall to care. I called Okafor. My answer is no. She wasn't surprised. Their offer dropped to $50,000 3 weeks later. I said no again. The hearing was in Cook County, Courtroom 14, a Tuesday in October when Chicago had decided to be November. Judge Helen Ferris, mid-60s, silver hair, the expression of someone who'd read too many fraudulent transfer cases and had stopped being surprised by the species. Fogarty went first. He was polished, confident, spoke about voluntary transfers and family estate planning and the legitimate concerns of a devoted daughter. Okafor went second. She produced the notary's statement, the $250 cash payment, the UPS store location, the mobility claims that Dr. Mehta's evaluation contradicted directly. She produced the bank records showing the financial POA was used to initiate account changes 11 days after I entered the facility. She produced my son-in-law's browser history obtained through discovery, searches for how to transfer property using power of attorney, and what constitutes abandoned property in Illinois and memory care facility, average length of stay. That last search was dated 3 weeks before the pot roast dinner. Fogarty objected to the search records on technical grounds. Judge Ferris allowed them. My daughter didn't testify. Fogarty advised against it for the same reason you don't put a leaky boat in the water. My son-in-law did testify. He was composed for about 20 minutes. Then Okafor asked him, quietly and precisely, to explain why he'd searched for abandoned property statutes in Illinois before the dinner where his father-in-law signed the transfer documents. He said he didn't recall the search. She showed him the discovery records. He said he might have been researching for a client. He worked in financial planning. It could have been for a client. What client, she asked, required you to research your father-in-law's specific property address? He had no answer. Judge Ferris made a note. She ruled the same afternoon. Fraud by misrepresentation. The quitclaim deed was declared void. Title remained with me. The financial account changes were reversed. The stolen items, my father's watch, my wife's jewelry, had been recovered from a consignment shop in Lisle where my son-in-law had sold them 6 weeks prior. The shop had records. The items were returned in evidence bags 2 days after the ruling. I sat in my car in the courthouse parking garage for a while before driving home. Not long enough. Okafor called as I pulled onto the highway. Criminal referral is going to the state's attorney's office, she said. financial elder abuse, theft, fraud. Their options are a plea or trial. Given the search history and the notary, she said, a plea is likely. They took the plea 3 months later. My daughter received 2 years probation and was required to complete a financial elder abuse intervention program. My son-in-law received 18 months probation and 200 hours community service, and the conviction followed him out of his financial planning career. The Professional Licensing Board had its own process. Okafor's total bill came to $22,000. I paid it in 2 installments. Wendell refused repayment for the initial $4,000 until I left an envelope in his mailbox and pretended not to know who'd put it there. He called to complain, and I told him I had no idea what he was talking about. He said that was the most dishonest thing I'd ever done, and I said it was a late birthday present. He'd had his birthday in March. It was November. He accepted it. I had the house assessed for a minor repair I'd been putting off, a sagging section of the back porch that I'd been stepping around for 2 years. The contractor came on a Thursday morning in December, stomped around the boards, gave me a reasonable number. I wrote the check that afternoon. My father's pocket watch went back to its shelf in the study. I wound it once and set it to the right time and put it down. My wife's jewelry I moved to the bank's safe deposit box, which I probably should have done years ago. The pencil marks on the kitchen doorframe are still there. My daughter's last mark is from when she was 17, 5'4", the same height she is now. There's a small smudge next to it from where I pressed my thumb once, not long after she left for college, just to touch something she'd touched. I don't know what to do with the mark. I leave it alone. I spent Christmas with Wendell and Norma and their 2 sons and their families, which made it the loudest holiday I'd had in years, and I ate too much, and Wendell's younger grandson fell asleep on the couch next to me during dessert, and I sat very still so as not to wake him. There are things about that year I will not recover from. I understand that. My daughter's face across the courtroom, the deliberate emptiness of her expression when the judge read the ruling, isn't something that goes away. You loved someone for 40 years and then you sit 3 feet from them in a courthouse, and you watch them look at you like a stranger, and some architecture inside you that you didn't know existed collapses. You can rebuild most things. Not that. What I kept was the house and the history it holds and the right to stay in it on my own terms until I decide otherwise. That's what I fought for. Not revenge, not satisfaction, just the right to remain in my own life. Some battles shouldn't have to be fought. Some victories don't feel like winning. But you fight them anyway, because the alternative is letting someone else decide who you are and what you're worth. And that is the one thing I was never willing to do.